today's episode, we're going to talk about why it's more important than ever to make sure you're working with an experienced real estate agent.
That is the reality of the real estate professional and the mortgage professional.
I mean, anyone can become a real estate agent. And once you get licensed, the education isn't over. You need somebody that is up to date like Jeb and Josh, that follows the market like Jeb and Josh.
I've seen realtors that are afraid to represent their buyer because they don't want to rock the boat.
This is The Educated Homebuyer with Jeb Smith and Josh Lewis.
With the housing market continuing to slow down, with transactions sitting at generational lows, compensation pressures out there with regard to real estate agents, changes in paperwork, all of the craziness. In today's episode, we're going to talk about why it's more important than ever to make sure you're working with an experienced real estate agent. And we're going to talk about today's episode, how to find one. So Josh, you and I bounce back and forth all the time in why it's important to work with a professional. But right now, there's a lot of changes happening in the industry, and I think there's some things that we definitely need to touch on.
Absolutely. One of the things that we often talk about is real estate and mortgage being 80-20 industries. So some of you are comfortable and familiar with the 80-20 rule. It's also known as the Pareto principle. It says that 20% of the inputs are responsible for 80% of the outcomes. It's a power law. We see it all throughout nature, throughout economics. And in our industries, what that tells us is that 20% of the producers, either realtors or mortgage people, are responsible for 80% of the output. But more than that, it's also a power law that is fractal, which means that 80-20 also applies to that top 20%. So in reality, we have the top 20% of the top 20% is responsible for about 65% of the business. We're going to go today and talk about this. It is not all about volume. We are not saying you have to find the biggest agent in your area and use that person, but you do need to find someone that is actively in the industry doing this every day, that is, an expert at their craft and dedicated to it. So in light of that, Jeb, we came across a bunch of numbers here. One survey that I was trying to find, it was over 10 years ago. It was about 2013, 2014. The National Association of Realtors came out with a study that showed that it was like 7%, 93%. The top 7% of agents did 93% of the business. And there's good and bad with that, which we're going to talk about. But let's talk about where we're at currently. So the NAR, your trade group, the National Association of Realtors, until this year has always put out numbers, and they do a survey on their industry of what production looks like. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes a different number. They show the number of full-time agents is peaked over 500,000. It did it in 2006. It did it again during the pandemic, and now we're down to 440,000. So we lost about 70,000 full-time realtors according to their measure last year.
Now, something important to understand there. That's not licensees. That's actually people that are actually actively selling real estate, right? So I think there's about 1.5 million people or so that actually have a real estate license, is my understanding. So the numbers are
554 is the most recent data that the National Association of Realtors published. So let's put that into context, Jeb. In 2023, there were 1.554 million realtors, but there were 4.09, so 4.1 million existing home sales, and then 600,000 roughly new home sales, which new homes, there's not a listing agent on there. The builder's going to list them themselves. So there might be one side of that transaction. So if we say two sides of 4.1 and one side of 600, that means there are about 8.8 million transactions available for those 1.5 million realtors. So 5.5 would be the average. But that's not the way it works out. It's skewed. It's not a normal distribution. It's skewed way to the side of the producers who are doing 15, 20, 30 transactions a year. Some of these groups doing 100, 150, 200 versus the guy that's doing 0 or 1. So from that perspective, NAR just did a recent survey that says 73% of realtors were very certain they'll remain active as a real estate professional for the next 2 years. So we got a quarter of people that are in the business not even sure they're going to continue doing this. The median gross income for realtors, income earned from real estate activities, was $55,000 in 2023. And remember, these people are generally independent contractors. There's expenses. It's not like you going to a job and getting a $5,000 a month paycheck. They have $1,000, $1,500 a month of expenses. So when we look at this, really, in California, we're a little bit jaded, but we got $20 an hour minimum wage for people that work fast food. That's fast food wages in California. If you're in another part of the country, if you're in Nebraska and you have $200,000 home sales and that person makes $55,000, they've done a number of units and they're probably making a lot more than a fast food worker. But this is what we're talking about when we're saying that is the reality of the real estate professional and the mortgage professional. It's funny, in one of the surveys that we looked at here, Jeb, it said not a majority, but like 30 to 40% of people are part-time, meaning they're retired and they're supplementing a retirement income. I mean, think about that. If you do 2 sales a year and you have your Social Security, you got a little pension, or you have a nice IRA, that stretches your money and makes it go a lot further. We have school teachers that will sell a home in the summer to another school teacher. So people that aren't full-time, just supplementing their income with it. On the mortgage side, we talk about this all the time. The nationwide mortgage licensing system, you can look up someone's license. The 2 number 1 feeders into the mortgage industry are personal training and pizza delivery. So you look at those 2, they're different industries, but we have a lot of people that this is not their craft. This is not their profession. We have very low barriers to entry. In most parts of the country, within 6 to 10 weeks and about $300 to $500, you can be licensed to sell real estate. And when we talk about this being the biggest purchase that most people make and the mortgage being the largest debt that most people ever acquire, I think it's more important than that. So we are here today to talk about how do you sift through this morass of potential real estate agents that you could work with to find one that's going to do a great job for you and your family.
Well, Josh, you just said something that I say all the time. Like, the real estate industry, the barrier to entry is so low. I mean, anyone can become a real estate agent. And in fact, one of the things that I often hear people say is, they're either changing jobs or they on some sort of pension. So, maybe they were a firefighter and now they're at the end of that and they're getting the pension from, that job. And they're like, you know what, I'm going to become a real estate agent. Why? Because I can do a couple transactions a year and make X amount of money. It's lenient. You can do whatever you want, so on and so forth. So that is the mentality out there with the industry. And most people know there's very little you have to do. There's no experience required once you get your license to go out and sell someone a house, which is absolutely crazy to me. So you can just take your test and then, Josh, you can say, hey, Jeb, I want to buy a house, and I can go try and help you buy a house. There's no other industry in the world. Think of a doctor or something clearly a lot more education, a lot, crucial, industry and profession and everything else. But the reality is, if someone just passed their boards and said, hey, you can just go do whatever, really? Like, that's how it works? No, you need some experience. And in that NAR study, Josh, there was a quote in there that I think is very, very important. And it says, the delta between great real estate service and poor real estate service has simply become too large due to the unacceptably low entry requirements to become a real estate agent. That sums it up very, very clearly. And with all of the recent changes with compensation, with new paperwork, boxes that have to be checked, the way you have to disclose certain things when making offers, there's going to be a lot of people that get screwed in this situation where they think their compensation is being covered or they think they're not paying compensation, and it's going to be submitted incorrectly. And I'm telling you right now, it's going to create additional lawsuits, right? The lawsuits were there to help protect buyers. There are going to be additional lawsuits because of the unfamiliar, I can't even say that word, unfamiliarity. You might have to help me with
new.
that.
It's all new.
It's all new documents.
No one has experience with it. And if you're not good with legal documents and going through this, like I see all the time, Jeb, I get contracts over. So I'm not the person responsible for writing the contract, but I have to review them. I see mistakes in these contracts all the time where in a market where it's typical that the seller pays for the owner's title policy, that the wrong box was checked and it cost you $1,500 because your realtor's an idiot and doesn't know what box to check.
No, and to go a step further, I'm in a bunch of chat rooms with full-time real estate agents in my company. I'm in different masterminds. I'm always talking to people in the industry, and you should see some of the questions that pop up in these chat rooms from people that are going to represent some of you listening. And it's not because there's a lack of education out there. It's not because there's a lack of transparency out there and how all this works. It's a lack of some people doing the work, some people understanding what they're doing, and people actually going above and beyond what they're required to do in the industry to actually stay licensed. I think that's really important is, once you get licensed, the education isn't over. That's only a small piece of the puzzle. I'm sitting here, you're sitting here because we continue to not only educate ourselves continually on the industry, being, experienced or whatever, but also going out and trying to find additional information so that we can be advocates, fiduciaries for our clients in this business. So, not here to beat this into anyone, but we see a lot of people out there going the easy route, especially with compensation changes, saying, hey, I'm just going to go with the guy that's willing to do it for this percent or that percent or whatever, because it's going to save me money. What it's going to end up doing is costing you money on purchase price, on negotiation, on repairs, on a lot of different things down the line.
Well, let me throw out something a little bit counterintuitive. So low barriers to entry, too much competition, too poorly trained competition that you're going up against. So those people that are inexperienced, untrained, what can they compete on? They can only compete on price. So what we're going to see right now, because sales volume is low, a real estate license is much less attractive to people. So we're seeing less licensees, and we see it every time the economy and the market takes a downturn. Well, now we are seeing downward pressure in commissions because a listing agent has always had to sign this contract. You have to go out and sit with the seller and say, here is what you are going to pay. It's going to be split between me and the buyer's agent, but this is what it costs you to sell. Many buyer's agents, especially the green new ones that don't want to have a conversation about money and how they get paid. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm free. I get paid by the seller. Now those people are going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with a buyer and say, this is what my services cost. This is how we're going to try and get it. We're going to ask the seller to pay it. If they don't pay it, you're going to have to pay it. It just becomes a more difficult conversation, because when we talk about newbie green agents, they aren't generally going out and listing houses. They find a friend that wants to buy a house and they represent that buyer, because that side of the transaction, a little less complex, a little bit easier, a little more checks and balances versus that listing, which has been the domain of the more experienced agents. So I personally think that regardless of the fact that we're not likely to raise the barriers to entry, we're going to see less and less people in the industry because of that downward pressure on commissions. If we look, I looked at a chart here. It said California was average 5.11. I see, these articles all the time talking about the 6% commission. Very few states were at 6%. Most of them were somewhere between that California 5.11 to about 5.5. And that's total. That's not no agent makes that for selling a house. That's both agents. Well, now that we've got this changed, I don't know where that number goes to, but when you say, if we're in California, median home price is $800,000 and you have a 2.5% commission on land, that's $20,000. Lots of people will look at that and say, hey, I'm a school teacher. I'm smart. I have a degree. I can get my license. If I can find another school teacher every summer to sell a house to, or one other person to sell a house to, I just added $20,000 to my $100,000 income. I get a 20% pay raise. That's a rational decision. Now, if that number goes down to 1.5, 1.25, 1.75, now you're going, well, that's not quite as much money. In high price markets like California, it's still real money. But if you're in Arkansas selling $150,000 houses, that becomes a much less attractive proposition. So we're going to see less licensees as we move forward, and that continued trend of the experienced agents that know how to sell their services, know how to market, getting more business. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I don't care about a mega team doing a ton of business. I care about my clients getting good representation. How do we make sure as buyers that we're getting with an agent that has our best interests at heart, that has the skills, and not just that, because many incompetent people have the best of intentions. So how do we make sure that not only do they have your best interests at heart, they have the skills and abilities to deliver on that? What are the measurables? What should they be looking at in terms of hiring a professional to take care of their family's needs?
It's a difficult question, because there are some newer agents out there that are good agents, right? They've learned the right way. They've been on teams, they've learned correctly, or they're just competent people that serve to begin with. They're servants by nature when it comes to relationships and how to do business, and they're good. So you can't, one of my things that I always say is experience, right? You want somebody that has experience. That doesn't mean they have to have 30 years of experience, but in environments like this where there's changes happening, you and I were having a conversation prior to coming on here. And I said, during 21, 22 or 2020 and 2021, if your agent hadn't sold a house and, in that time frame, the last house they sold was 2019 or 2018, they were in for a shock because of how fast the market was moving. And I was on YouTube and you and I were talking continuously about how quickly things were changing and how you had to adjust to that market in order to be competitive. You had to do things you'd never done before, recommend things to clients that you'd never recommended before, because otherwise you had no chance. Well, now you're on the flip side of that where it's not as crazy, but you have changes in paperwork and compensation and how things are written and how things are presented. And as a seller or a listing agent, how you look at things. And it's a different deal. So if your agent isn't up to date, they're not doing the training, they're not staying up to date on things, you as a buyer are going to be on the, you're going to get hurt from that. In some instances, right? You're not going to get the representation that you need. You're not going to have the fiduciary, the advocate that can, that really is grinding for the best price and the best terms, because it's a different environment. And so it's important to find somebody that is selling and has sold in the current environment and understands those changes. You don't necessarily need Jeb or need Josh, but you need somebody that is up to date like Jeb and Josh, that follows the market like Jeb and Josh, that understands the dynamic, can have conversations, that can communicate. And I think that's what's important out there, right? I'm not saying Jeb is the only guy that knows what he's doing. There's a lot of great agents. In fact, I know a bunch, and I know a bunch of great mortgage professionals, but I would say I've been doing this for 20 years. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of these people. I also know way more that aren't as great, way more that aren't as professional. So
you have lots of options to find excellent realtors and lending people, but if you don't take that seriously, you are more likely, if you just roll out into the woods, you are more likely to get with someone that is average to poor than you are to get with someone that's great, even though there are plenty of great professionals out there for you.
Well, and I think that's a good transition. If you're out there in the industry or as a buyer right now, as a potential seller looking for options, reach out. We would love the opportunity to guide you through the process. We do this, podcast as a education, as an opportunity to serve and give back and make sure everybody knows what's going on. But we also, this is how we do our day-to-day jobs. This is how we get business. So if we could be of any, assistance to you, reach out. We would love the opportunity to help. I sell real estate. Josh does mortgages, clearly. But transitioning from that, Josh, experience. What comes after experience? If you were looking for an agent, what would you be looking for?
I would want to know, and in terms of experience, I'm not saying I want someone necessarily who's in the business for 40 years. And I'm also not saying I want someone that sold 100 houses last year. I want to make sure they have recent relevant experience. Like, again, if you go back to that 21, 22 timeframe, if you're talking to an agent and they haven't sold a home in a year, were they retired? Were they living on an island? Like, every agent was doing business in that time frame because so many homes were selling. Now, over the last couple of years, we went from 6 million sales to 4 million sales. So there's a third less home sales available. So just want to make sure that it's someone that is active in the industry, selling at least 3 to 5 homes, with at least 3 to 5 years of experience. And if we're talking someone on the shorter end of that experience spectrum, I want to hear from them. How did you get in the business? What drew you to it? How did you get your knowledge and experience? How do you educate yourself? Jeb, you talk about you're in a mastermind group, multiple mastermind groups. So do they have to be? Do they have to be in coaching? Do they have to be in a mastermind? No, but it goes a long way. Do they have a mentor? Do they have someone, hey, I worked on so-and-so's team. They do 300 sales a year, and I worked on 25 transactions a year for them. I want to hear where that level of experience came from. And as a buyer or a seller, I want to hear, what are my expectations of you? Because let's be realistic. And even for me on the mortgage side, Jeb, I think I'm the greatest. Does that mean that I'm the greatest for everyone? Nope, because I have a way that I go through it. And if it doesn't mesh up with you, if you're the person that, hey, I want to be able to text you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the most important thing to me is that I hear back from you within 15 minutes. I'm pretty available. I'm not that available. If you want someone who only does 3 transactions a month, so those 3, they can sit there and watch them like a hawk and call you every day and talk about that file. I'm probably not your guy. We have systems and processes in place, but if you want to ask me about those systems and processes, I'm happy to go through them. And we want to make sure that that meshes up. So for me, if I'm going to talk to a realtor, those are the things I'm going to ask. How many sales have you done in the last couple of years? How long have you been in the business? What do you do to educate yourself? Are you a member of any mastermind groups? What is my expectation about your level of service? And that's not a qualitative judgment saying that you're wrong. I just want to hear, Jeb, why are you awesome? What are the things that you bring to the table? Because I want to make sure that meshes up with what I want, need, and am looking for in a real estate professional.
No, the reality is not all agents are created equal, nor are mortgage professionals. I would go a step further and say, you need to find somebody that is not local to, say, your market per se, like they got to be a specialist in Huntington Beach, but they've sold property in, say, Huntington Beach, or they know the market. Something like last year I went on a listing appointment for a client who was selling in Huntington Beach. His other option was an agent from LA. And I'm like, why? Like, how is that? How are we even comparing one to another? Right? I don't know anything about LA. I mean, I know enough to drive around and show you where the Hollywood sign is, and I can take you down to Hollywood Boulevard, and you can take a picture of your favorite star, and you can see some homeless people. You can do a lot of fun things in LA.
Homeless person to see your favorite star.
But the reality is, I shouldn't be selling real estate in LA for the most part. And so the same can be said about here. So just find somebody that's local somewhat. If your agent is selling real estate and they're willing to drive 3 hours to sell you a house, they probably need that house more than you need that house. I mean, that's the reality. Like when I have somebody reach out to me for San Diego, I have agents that I'm going to refer you to in San Diego. LA, same thing. Riverside, same thing. I'm not Jeb showing you property. Why? Because that's not my specialty. You need to find somebody that knows that market, understands that market, can guide you through that market, has had transactions in that market, right? One thing I have is a map of all the places I've sold property. I show it to clients. Hey, this is where I've sold property. It's pretty much all of Orange County. Outside of that, I'm probably not the right guy. So local expertise is as crucial as experience in many cases. Find client reviews. Read somebody's reviews online and then ask them, hey, the last 4 transactions that you did, can I talk to those people? Do you have phone numbers? Can I get email addresses? Can you make an introduction? I want to see how the transaction went. It's important, right? People can write anything online, and sometimes they can do it without even being the person that wrote it online, right? So get some verification. Go through the process. One thing, like, when somebody does a rental application, Josh, there's always references on the rental application, right? Do you think they reference bad people on the rental application? No, they're going to reference people that are going to back up what they say. But rather, go through reviews online, find somebody that, it wasn't the 5-star everything, and say, hey, I want to talk to that person. Let me see what that experience was like, because that'll give you a better gauge of who you're going to work with.
And there should be a volume of reviews online, Jeb. It shouldn't be 3 people. Anyone new to the business for the last 5 minutes can get 3 people they know to go online and say, hey, 5-star, awesome. So what does that number look like? Real estate people do less transactions than mortgage people.
10 reviews. No more, no less. 110. That's where I sit today.
Real estate people have less transactions than mortgage people. So maybe the number's 20, maybe it's 25, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 110. But there should be a volume of there. When you read through them, you should be able to tell a couple things, that many people had similar experiences, have similar feelings, and you will start noticing themes of what people say. So going back to saying what I'm awesome at may be something that's totally unimportant to you. And if you see all my clients say, Josh is really good at this, and you go, I don't even care. Maybe I'm not the best fit for you. And same thing for the real estate side. If you go through my 100-something reviews online, you're going to hear consistent themes of what people like about working with us. And it's probably pretty important that is something that is valued by you, because if you don't value that, you're going to go, wow, I don't know why all these people think he's so great.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, it's not here, look at us, we're the best, we're the greatest. Even though I'd like to think that we're definitely in that 1%, it's about finding somebody that you can communicate with, somebody that you feel like is got your best interest in mind, someone that is willing to negotiate, but also not willing to get in the way of a transaction. And what I mean by that is in negotiation, one thing that you'll find in the real estate industry and probably every other industry as well, I'm not, in tune with those industries because I don't deal with it, but is agents, people getting in the way of their own transactions. Sometimes you have agents negotiating on your behalf client-wise, and clients, you don't even know that that agent is negotiating on your behalf in a way that could be impacting you, could be hurting you. And what I mean by that is sometimes you're submitting offers for clients or reviewing offers for people that have submitted offers, and the agent on the other side is defensive in their response in just communication without ever taking it to their client, without ever going that next level. So when you decide on who's going to, represent you, just make sure that not only do they have your best interest in mind, but they understand that negotiation process, because a lot can happen in a real estate transaction that people are afraid to discuss, don't want to bring it up because they just feel like it's going to get shut down or whatever. And I've been there. I've been there as an agent, Josh. I know what it's like to get defensive on behalf of your client. But over time, you understand that, okay, like I see what I was doing there, and that doesn't benefit my client or myself. So you've got to have somebody with enough, wherewithal to know the differences.
Well, while you were saying that, I came to a different answer to something that you asked previously. What are you looking for? I say, what is my buying decision when I'm purchasing the services of a realtor? What would I base that decision off of? So I would want someone who's an expert in that local area. So what does that mean? It means that they know the area very well. They've operated there for a period of time. They have a network. They have a network of other realtors. Like, I can't tell you how many times you go and have a client that wants to write an offer and you go, hey, I know the listing agent, or hey, I had a transaction with them 3 years ago. All of that stuff is incredibly valuable. So I want someone that is local and experienced in that area. They know title and escrow companies. They know customs. So they know like the transactional piece of the business. They know how to manage a transaction. So we talked about completing that contract. They know the contract. They know exactly what it is. They know exactly how to explain it. They know how and what boxes we want to check to protect us and what we're asking. So just the foundational elements of doing the job, that knowledge and expertise in the area and the network. And then the last piece is what you were just talking about. I don't know if you remember, Jeb, 15 years ago, there was a best-selling book, Crucial Conversations. And it was because people needed to read about how to have difficult conversations. Your job is difficult conversations on a day-to-day basis. And some of them suck. There are people who could be awesome at the other two elements that I just told you, but I've seen realtors that are afraid to represent their buyer because they don't want to rock the boat. It is someone they've had a transaction with and say, I don't want that person to think I'm a dick. Like, this is the job. And this also comes back to why you and I are not big fans of dual agency. We get questions every week on the live show. People say, hey, I'm just going to find a house. I'm going to the listing agent and ask them to represent me. Oh, cool. You don't want an agent. You want a mediator. So your best case is they're going to split the difference between you and the seller. More likely, their bread is buttered on the seller's side. It's going to be 70-30 or some degree to the seller's side. So that ability to have difficult conversations, like truly, I'm not just, blowing smoke here. One of your superpowers, Jeb, is the ability to have difficult conversations without being adversarial or being rude and getting into a fight with someone, because it is necessary and essential part of the realtor's job. So for me personally, that's my buying decision. And I look at properties in other areas. When we bought our place in Rancho Mirage, I used an agent out there. It's only 2 hours away, but our complex is 800 units. I needed her to tell me everything about that. Well, you want to face this direction. Well, some people don't like being on this side of the wash. Like, there were 50 things that I would have never known about that property that I needed her to be able to walk us through that. And she also had some difficult conversations with the seller when it came time to it on the home inspection.
No, I agree. I tell people all the time, one thing I do with clients is when I sit down and about communication, and I say, listen, if something goes wrong, we're going to have the conversation immediately. We're going to try to figure out a solution immediately, because the longer we drag it on, which, trust me, you see it in your industry with people not wanting to give you information on, decisions, on loan approvals, on different things, just pushing it just hoping something's going to change so they don't have to have the difficult conversation, versus coming out on the other side of it, having the difficult conversation now and trying to figure out a solution to the conversation or to the problem so that you can get to the finish line, right? I mean, you can have the agent with the best intentions, the mortgage professional that is, 30 years in the business, but if you don't actually get the home, if you don't get to the finish line because somebody didn't do their job or didn't communicate effectively, then what do you really have? At the end of the day, you want whatever the result is that you're going for. And I think it's important to make sure that you're working with somebody that understands where you're trying to get, is not just a yes man, a yes ma'am. They're willing to almost not push back to you to some degree, but willing to have the conversation that makes you think about something else, right? That you're not, a really good example, Josh, would be client recently wanted to be in a certain neighborhood. We put in an offer on that property. We got the offer accepted. They started, in my opinion, having cold feet. Just based on, I knew what was happening. They started seeing some other property, and immediately they questioned everything about the property they were in escrow on. Because we had the conversation prior to, and I knew why they wanted to be in that community, all of the things that were important in that community versus everywhere else, we were able to bring the conversation back around, right? And it wasn't me saying, hey, you told me this, or I whatever. It was, hey, remember when you said this and why we didn't go here and why we did, reminding them of why we were doing what we were doing to start with, why we ended up making an offer on that property versus some others. And yeah, just a reminder, oh yeah, that is why, because people get into the process and it's difficult. It's an emotional process, justified logically. We talk about it all the time. And so you need somebody that can step back, is not really emotionally involved in it. They want the best for you. They're empathetic to everything that's happening with you in that process. They're bummed when you don't get the property. They're excited for you when you get it, but they're also there to negotiate on your behalf, to get you the best terms at the best price, all of that stuff. That's ultimately what you want.
Without being emotional, numbers, money is emotional. Your house, it's emotional. It's a stressful process. So it's another tool that an agent, that your lender have to have in their arsenal to be able to walk you through logically while you're experiencing stuff emotionally, which is absolutely inevitable.
No, and so with that, if Josh or I can be of any assistance to you, if you're buying, selling a home, you need a loan, we would love the opportunity to help you. And if you're outside of our area, outside of our expertise, if you will, if that's even possible, we're happy to refer you to somebody that can guide you through that process and ultimately get you to the finish line. So Josh, if somebody were out there looking at the moment, looking to buy a home, what's the one tip you would give to just kind of wrap this whole thing up?
Know what you want and know how to ask the questions of your mortgage and real estate professional to make sure that it aligns. Because we talked about the majority of people are not great in either industry, but plenty of them are. But even if you find someone who's great, they just may not be a good fit for you. So you need to know, what are the important things to me in this transaction on the real estate side, on the mortgage side, and be able to, you have that crucial conversation with the people you're interviewing. And I'm not saying tell them, hey, here's the 1, 2, 3 things that are important to me. How do you do on those scales? Because everyone's going to go, I'm really good at that stuff. Ask the questions that will reveal whether they find that portion of the transaction important, and are they going to be able to deliver on what your needs and expectations are, because we're all different. It's just like relationships. My wife is amazing. Someone else might think, hey, I couldn't deal with that. She cleans the house 87 hours a day, and if I drop one thing, she gets mad. I think it's fantastic because my house is always perfect. Some people would be like, this is excessive. Same thing with professionals.
No, good stuff. And I can attest to everything that Josh just said. But no, with that, guys, we want some feedback. We were considering doing another episode where we actually talk about the job as a real estate agent, what you should find, like what your agent should actually be doing through the process, other than negotiating and doing those things, but more in depth with helping you find homes, all of that. If that's something that you find value in or think you would find value in, do us a favor and drop a line either in the video here if you're watching on YouTube, or send us a message on Spotify or Apple or wherever you're listening to the podcast, because we want to know if that's actually something that you're interested in. It would be helpful to know. And if there's anything else you want us to cover, that would also be helpful. Let us know there. But until next time, guys, make sure you're buying right, you're borrowing smart, and ultimately you'll build wealth. Until next time, adios.
Amigos.